Okay, as the title suggests, I've worked through a number of JRPG titles so far this year, and instead of just making a review video for each one, as I can only really do 1 or 2 videos a week at the moment, I thought it'd be best to condense all of these JRPGs into one video, quickly giving you guys my thoughts on these 4 games. Inherently enough, these games provided great comparisons for each other, regarding level design, story depth, gameplay immersion, and when comparing one game to another, it helps you to understand which game lacked what quality and what they could do to further improve themselves. But without further ado, let's just dive into these 4 games and go through what I liked about them and what I think could be done better. Starting things off, we have VIII Lacrimosa of Dana, or Dana I should probably say. Embarrassingly enough, I actually thought this was only available on the Nintendo Switch. Turns out it's also available on the PS4, which I kind of wish I knew beforehand because this one had severe issues with frame rate drops throughout the entire game. I had heard great things about the series, and this was my first time ever getting into one of these VIII games. It kind of felt like 2 separate games for me though, however. Early game is spent on a shipwrecked island where you explore the island, looking to build up your camp, find lost passengers, and find a way off. And then all of a sudden the latter part of the game twists into some really unnecessary magical stuff, and honestly I wasn't so sure about it. This one took me about 38 hours to complete, but included me skipping a lot of the dialogue and bypassing enemies towards the end of the game just so I could finish this. The gameplay itself was fun early doors, but slowly got boring and really repetitive. It's an action RPG, however you're only limited to a handful of special moves you can do per character to spice up each repetitive battle that you now have with numerous monsters across the island. The main character of this game is a voiceless, self-insert character, which I think is also true across the rest of this series, and it's pretty rubbish as well, as most of the voice choices that you got between the 2 options when you're having conversations with the character just led to the same replies. So you might as well just have an actual character that you can follow the story to instead of just a half-assed self-insert person. Voice acting is also massively inconsistent across the whole game, where some sentences even have parts being voiced and then the next sentence is suddenly not voiced, causing huge moments of dialogue between characters to seem really jumpy and jarring. I will say, however, that the music was a definite standout. I really enjoyed the background music throughout the whole game, and that was one of the things that kept me going. And true fashion to a JRPG, the ending is either going to be incredible or an absolute miss, and unfortunately I found this ending pretty weak. I heard a new one has just come out, and I'd be keen to see if they've improved on their faults or improved their graphical upgrades. I'd probably look to get this one on the PS5 instead, as I still don't think the Switch can really handle the scope of the levels that they were trying to create. And whilst I feel that this game did a lot to make the gameplay enjoyable, though albeit repetitive towards the end, I think a lot was left to be desired with the characters and the story that we follow. Up next we had Tales of Berseria. I'm a huge Tales of fan and have played most of the flagship games that I can get my hands on. This one was, to me, the complete opposite of VIII. And when I say opposite, I mean that the gameplay was where this game I feel felt completely short and the story was top notch. Its predecessor, Tales of Zestiria, I thought was really boring and really uninteresting to play as well. Whereas Berseria's story was at least that good that it made me want to play this game until the very end, even though I could not stand the fighting mechanics in this. We had really great cinematic cutscenes and everything was voice acted by great voice actors. And that for me is one of the key points of immersion, to keep you interested in the story when it's not taking you out with jarring sentences being half voiced and half not. Unfortunately, like Zestiria though, I was not a fan of this combat system. This action RPG uses a combo-like system where each move in the combo is a special move or an art. You can do up to 5 of these moves at a time, but taking hits or getting stunned reduces the amount of moves that you can do in a combo. Furthermore, hitting enemies and stunning them increases your combo up to that maximum of 5. Bottom line is that it's nothing short of irritating. Previous Tales games used basic attacks and then you could switch up with special moves, which felt more entertaining. The specialness of the arts is diminished, and as a great villain once said, once everything's special,
no one will be.
We also had so many of these special moves that it was just a chore to figure out which move did what, because I couldn't remember that many. It's messy, it's boring, and a lot of the times I was getting absolutely thrashed about by enemies where I was only being able to do 1 move combos. it was this negative cycle which I couldn't get out of because I'd only had one move to do a combo with, which meant I had less chance of stunning my enemy, allowing me to get my combo back up. So I was stuck there for 5-minute bouts just doing one move over and over again. And the other part which was made even more apparent to me after playing VIII was the level design is the second travesty of this game. There was absolutely no thought put into the levels at all. I understand they were going for this mechanic where as soon as you encounter a monster, the world around you was that battlefield, but I think as a consequence, it made each level that you walked through so mundane, wide and boring. With no thought put into the design of these levels and just simply long corridors that took so much time to get through, it felt like an absolute cheap way to drag out the runtime of this game. Another opposite factor to VIII was that the music was so bland. I can honestly say that no gameplay element of this game was enjoyable, and I rushed through nearly everything I could just so that I could continue the story and finish the game as quickly as possible. Honestly, this would have been better being an anime. It's a shame it took a step forward in terms of voice acting and story presentation, but 2 steps back in terms of overall gameplay and fun. There was no frame rate issues and the overall graphics are fine, and I just know the level design has never been their strong point for Tales games, but this was an all-time low bar. I've seen a few trailers coming out for Tales of Arise and it looks like they've taken so many good steps in the right direction. It looks absolutely stunning and I cannot wait to play it in September. Up next was Code Vein. A good example of a game which you can't get anything right. It's anime meets Dark Souls and supposedly an easier Dark Souls title. The game follows a post-apocalyptic world where people need a supply of blood in order to survive. That resource is finite and it's closed off in a city we play with a self-insert character again who can potentially change the tide and help all those in need. This was an interesting way of finding out that I suck at Dark Souls type games, and the majority of this game consisted of me just dying, more dying again, double dying, and just even more dying. The repetitive action RPG combat mechanics got boring pretty fast as well, and a lack of music or interactive characters around the world whilst exploring quickly turned this game into a bit of a dull slugfest. I'm sorry to say that I didn't even finish it. And the 4th title on this list is Trails of Cold Steel 3. This series is mental. This to me is almost like reading a bloody book. I know more about this world and the politics in this game on this fictional content than I do my own bloody country I live in. If you want something to completely sink your teeth into and learn every inch of details about hundreds of characters, this is the one. The trade-off though is that it's unbearably stereotypical. This hits more of that JRPG anime trope list than any of the other games I played. I played and enjoyed the first 2 games, but it came a bit more apparent to me in this one that it takes itself just way too seriously. It's combined with awkwardly slow cutscenes and gameplay movement, and it always felt like so much of a drag to read all these tech boxes and watching all these slow panning camera angles and movements that just made the scenes less interesting to watch. Luckily there's a speed up function, but then it makes the gameplay somewhat quick and janky, and it almost needs some sort of middle option or the ability to speed up certain parts of the game only. I don't know, the pacing was just off, especially in this 3rd installment, which was way too many of these, oh, this wasn't me fighting seriously, or let's do a boss battle but there's no consequences, and by the time I got to the finale I just lost all interest as there felt like there was no consequences. When big revelations finally happened, it was far less impactful than what it should have been. The first half of the game consists entirely of retreading the same gameplay of the first 2 games, mixed in with dialogue of 100 characters, all reminding you of the last time that they saw each other was. And a lot of this dialogue was unvoiced, and the voice actors chime in at very random times similar to VIII. But most noticeably was the main character's voice actor, who was highly inconsistent. When you're having a conversation with another character in the same scene and they've got a voice actor and you don't, it becomes really jarring. The gameplay has been a little bit upgraded since the predecessors, but it follows the same structure of this turn-based combat mixed with skill moves, spells, and a customizable ability board allowing you to build any character with whatever spells and perks you fancy. And whilst it's great, it means that essentially any character can be played the exact same, and there's not really much uniqueness to each of these people besides the weapon of choice. While the combat mechanics fell a little bit flat for me, I really enjoyed everything outside of the combat to do with this game. You can invest free time outside of battles to improve relationship with comrades. Improving relationships outside of the battle also meant positive effects would take place within battles as well. Characters might jump in to save you or heal you when you get hit without having to ask them to do so. It made for a nice bonus effect for your impact on the story. Whilst you wanted to interact with certain players because you probably liked them more or you wanted to see it go down that story route, it was also great to see that it would pay off in dividends towards battles as well. And yet, despite all these negatives, I ended up sinking well over 50 hours into this, and I'm still wanting to see things out throughout to the end with the 4th installment. The ending of this one was a bit crap as well. It was a desperate cliffhanger, but I think I'd still like to play the 4th and finish off this story. Even with all of its flaws, there's still so much obvious charm and love put into these games. If you look past all the cliches, the stereotypes and the slight cringe, then you can immerse yourself into this massively fleshed out story spanning hundreds of characters where they all eventually link together. This does come with the requirement of having to play the 2 games before it, which are also quite deep and rich in terms of story content, which means that to get to the point I am, I probably had to invest in well over 150 hours. Looking at Tales of Berseria and VIII, where they've managed to define their characters so well with their unique abilities, weapons and movement, I wish Trails of Cold Steel 3 could have taken a little bit of those elements to put the cherry on the cake. And as far as comparing these games go, I'm just going to throw a quick table together to show you how I think each game did in terms of story, gameplay, level design, immersion, and also the time that I put into the game as well. I think I can clearly say that Trails of Cold Steel 3 was probably my favourite game out of the 3 of these, but can still see moments where it could learn a thing or two from the Tales of studios in terms of its presentation and voice acting, and could also learn a thing or two from VIII in terms of its level design and how to make an open world map more interesting. Code Vein unfortunately just falls in all 4 categories. So there you go, that's some of my thoughts on 4 JRPGs that I managed to bash out this year so far, and I'm looking forward to carrying on this year with games such as Scarlet Nexus, Tales of Rise, and probably the 4th installment to Trails of Cold Steel. Hopefully you found this video format helpful and it provides just a quick insight into my thoughts on these games, and it might inspire you to play these or not play these, but also to think about previous games that you've played and compare them in terms of their qualities to find what elements could they borrow from other games in order to improve themselves. But most importantly, I'd love to know what all of your thoughts on these games are. Have you played any or all of them? Let me know if you agree with my thoughts in the comments down below, or if you thought differently. If you liked this video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe, it really does help me out. And as always, stay tuned for more reviews on movie, anime and video games. Until next time guys, take care. Bye bye.